4:13 through 15. So this is right as after Boaz marries Ruth. Then Boaz took responsibility of Ruth, and they married. After they came together, Ruth conceived by the Lord's provision, and later gave birth to a son. So it's possible that maybe she was married to her first husband. Maybe they couldn't have children, because either way they didn't. So now she's blessed with a child. At this point, because her husband passed away, until she married Boaz, she may have been in a condition where she didn't know if she'd ever have a child. Which, for women at that time, they didn't own property or anything. It was always the male. So it was more bigger problem than it is in today's time. Today's time, a woman can go out and work and care for herself, but at that time it wasn't that way. And Ruth did what she did to have food, and there was provisions under the law to where she could eat. But she still would have been like I believe the term squatter, where you just stay on somebody's property, because she didn't own any. She would be relying on generosity of others her entire life. But now she has a son and a husband who, even if Boaz passes away, which in Scripture doesn't imply he passes away anytime, leaving her a widow, but eventually that would happen, she would have a son to care for her in that place, which was the purpose of the kinsman redeemer, to keep caring for the widows. We see in the New Testament how the church tends to the orphans and widows first, because they're the ones that need help. And then there's scripture about how those who are able will let them work, not to take advantage of the system. So God always leaves provision to care for the poor. When we see with Jesus picking, I believe it's corn or something to eat, and it was the Sabbath, and how the Pharisees plucked at him. This wasn't a field Jesus or any of his disciples owned, but Scripture said, I believe it's in Leviticus, talks about provision for those who have food, so people can eat. It allowed them to do that as long as they didn't fill their bag with it and take it home. They were allowed to go in the field and eat, so that they would have food. So God's law provided for those who were in need, always. Verse 14. The praise of God, the Lord, one has not been, the Lord, He has not abandoned you. He did not leave you without a redeeming guardian. May your offspring be famous in all of Israel. So I believe this is them speaking to Naomi. Yeah, it's women, and they're giving acknowledgement to Naomi. She was at the point, I remember in the earlier part of the book of Ruth, where she wanted to die. She didn't feel like there was purpose to life anymore. And now seeing this child gives her joy. You know, oftentimes a change in life, something's occurrence happening, God will bring, after a time of trial, something to bring us back up, you know. Because even if our joy is in Him, hard times are hard. And soon after them, He typically brings something that isn't, and lightens our heart and gives us joy again, because He's a good Lord. Most of the time, that's the way He happens. Sometimes there's those who continually, it seems like they're trial after trial, and the Lord just gives them strength to get through it the whole time, which happens as well. If we keep our focus on Him, then we're going to find joy. And just sometimes it's going to be harder to have it. Verse 15. May this child give you a new life. May He strengthen you and provide for you in your old age. Look at your daughter-in-law Ruth. She loves you. This one devoted daughter is better to you than 7 sons would be. She is the one who gave you this child. So what they're pointing out is very significant. They're pointing to the fact that Ruth left her home to stay and care with Naomi. She left everything she knew to do this. This was a great love. We see a greater love when God came down from heaven, Jesus did, to die on the cross for us. Ruth, the kinsman redeemer, is symbolic of what Christ did for us, because He's our kinsman redeemer. We inherit glory through Him and His redemption. So the greater story there is of Christ. But they're pointing out, you have somebody who cares for you. Yes, you lost your sons and your husband. But God still made a way for somebody to care for you. And she brought this child, and this is a reason for see God's blessing in your life. That God still is blessing even though you face loss. And when we go through times of trial, that's what we have to recognize. We have to look for where God is blessing us, so that the trial itself don't bring us down into despair more than it. Because if we don't look for the good and don't look to God for what His blessings are, it will bring us to a place of despair.